Chapter 78, 2000 Saffron Robes. One afternoon, as the Buddha was doing walking meditation along the mountain slope, two bhikkhus arrived carrying Venerable Devadatta on a stretcher. Venerable Devadatta's health had been poor for several years, and now, on the point of death, he wished to see the Buddha. He had only 6 remaining disciples, having lost even his most fervent supporters years earlier. His closest associate, Venerable Kokalika, died years before of an unusual skin disease. During Devadatta's final years at Gayasisa, he had much time alone to examine his actions. When the Buddha was informed that Venerable Devadatta wished to see him, he returned to his hut at once in order to receive him. Venerable Devadatta was too weak to sit up. He had barely enough strength to speak. He looked at the Buddha and with great pain joined his palms and spoke the words, "I take refuge in the Buddha." The Buddha gently placed his hand on Devadatta's forehead. That evening, Venerable Devadatta died. It was summer, and the skies were clear and blue. The Buddha was preparing to depart on a journey when a messenger from King Ajatasattu arrived. It was Vasakara, the king's minister of foreign affairs. He had been asked by the king to inform the Buddha about the king's intentions to send his army to conquer Vajji, a country which lay north of the Ganga. Before carrying out his attack, the king wanted to ask what the Buddha thought of his plans. Venerable Ananda was also present, standing behind the Buddha and fanning him. The Buddha turned to Ananda and asked, "Venerable Ananda, have you heard whether or not the people of Vajji still regularly gather in large numbers to discuss politics?" Ananda answered, "Lord, I have heard that the people of Vajji often assemble in large numbers to discuss the political situation." "Then Vajji still prospers, Ananda. And tell me, do you know whether or not they still display a spirit of cooperation and unity during their meetings?" "Lord, I have heard they enjoy great cooperation and unity." "Well then, Vajji still prospers." "Ananda, do the people of Vajji still respect and follow the laws that have been enacted in their country?" "Lord, I have heard that they respect and follow all their laws." "Then it is certain Vajji still prospers." "Ananda, do the people of Vajji respect and listen to worthy leaders?" "Lord, I have heard that the people of Vajji respect and listen to worthy leaders." "Then it is certain their country still prospers." "Ananda, have you heard whether or not there is rape and other violence in Vajji?" "Lord, there is almost no rape or other violent crime in their country." "Then Vajji continues to prosper." "Ananda, have you heard whether or not the people of Vajji still protect and maintain the shrines of their ancestors?" "Lord, it is said that they protect and maintain the shrines of their ancestors." "Then Vajji still prospers." "Have you heard whether or not the people of Vajji respect, make offerings to, and study with spiritual teachers who have attained the way?" "Lord, they continue to respect, make offerings to, and study with spiritual teachers who have attained the way." "Ananda, it is then certain that Vajji still prospers." "Ananda, some time ago, the Tathagata had the opportunity to speak with Vajji's leaders about the 7 practices which make a country prosper. They are called the 7 practices of non-regression. They include gathering together for discussion, cooperation and unity, respecting laws that have been enacted, respecting and following worthy leaders, refraining from rape and other violent crimes, protecting the ancestral shrines, and respecting teachers who have attained the way. As the people of Vajji continue to observe these 7 practices, it is certain that their country still prospers. Because of that, the Tathagata believes it will be impossible for Magadha to defeat Vajji. Minister Vasakari spoke. Lord, if the people of Vajji observed only one of those 7 practices, their country would prosper. Lord, I do not think King Ajatasattu can win a war with Vajji with power and weapons alone. He could only succeed if he sowed the seeds of discord among Vajji's leaders. Thank you, Lord, for your counsel. I will return now to my duties. After Vasakara departed, the Buddha turned to Ananda and said, Vasakara knows how to scheme. The Tathagata fears that in future King Ajatasattu will indeed send his army to fight Vajji. That afternoon, the Buddha asked Venerable Ananda to invite all the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis currently in Rajgaha to assemble at Vulture Peak. When, after 7 days, they were all gathered, they numbered 2,000. It was a splendid sight to see so many saffron robes against the mountain. The Buddha walked slowly from his hut down to the Dharma platform where the monks and nuns were gathered. He stepped up onto the platform, looked out over the community, smiled, and said, Bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, the Tathagata will teach you the 7 methods to prevent the teaching and sangha from falling into decline. Listen. First, meet frequently in groups to study and discuss the Dharma. Second, always gather and disperse in a spirit of cooperation and unity. Third, respect and follow the precepts which have been enacted. Fourth, respect and follow the guidance of elders in the sangha who possess virtue and experience. Fifth, live a pure and simple life, unswayed by desire and greed. Sixth, cherish a calm and peaceful life. Seventh, dwell in mindfulness in order to realize peace, joy, and liberation, and to become a refuge and support to friends along the path. Bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, if you live by these 7 practices, the Dharma will flourish and the sangha cannot fall into decline. Nothing outside will be able to disturb the sangha. Only division and discord from within can cause the sangha to break. Bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, when a lion king dies in the mountain forest, no animals dare eat its flesh. Only the worms in its own body devour it from within. Protect the Dharma by living according to these 7 practices. Never become as worms which devour a lion's corpse from within. The Buddha also counseled the monks and nuns to avoid wasting precious time by engaging in idle conversation, oversleeping, pursuing fame and recognition, chasing after desires, spending time with people of poor character, and being satisfied with only a shallow understanding of the teaching. He reminded them of the 7 factors of awakening as the path every bhikkhu and bhikkhuni should travel: mindfulness, investigating dharmas, energy, joy, ease, concentration, and letting go. He also repeated the teachings on impermanence, emptiness of self, non-attachment, liberation, and overcoming desire and greed. The 2,000 monks and nuns remained on Vulture Peak for 10 days. They slept beneath trees, in caves and huts, or by mountain streams. The Buddha gave them a Dharma talk every day. On the 10th and final day, the Buddha told them they could return to their own centers. After the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis departed, the Buddha turned to Venerable Ananda and said, "We will visit Bamboo Forest tomorrow." After visiting Bamboo Forest, the Buddha and Ananda left Rajagaha and headed towards Ambalatika, the refreshing park set aside long ago by King Bimbisara for followers of the way. The bhikkhus often rested there on their way to Nalanda. Venerable Sariputta had once dwelled there with Rahula. The Buddha visited and instructed the bhikkhus living in Ambalatika. He spoke about precepts, concentration, and understanding. The Buddha proceeded to Nalanda, accompanied by 100 bhikkhus. Venerable Ananda, Sariputta, and Anuruddha walked close by his side. When they reached Nalanda, the Buddha rested in Pavarika's mango grove. The next morning, Venerable Sariputta sat for a long, quiet moment by the Buddha's side. Finally, he said, "Lord, I am sure that in the past, present, or future, there is no spiritual teacher whose wisdom and attainment surpasses yours." The Buddha said, "Sariputta, those words are as bold as a lion's roar. Have you met all the spiritual teachers in the past, present, and future that you dare make such a statement?" "Lord, I have not met all the masters of the 3 realms, but there is one thing I know for certain. I have lived close by you for more than 45 years. I have heard your teaching, and I have observed the way you live. I know that you dwell constantly in awareness. You are a perfect master of your 6 senses. You never show any sign of the 5 obstacles of greed and desire, anger and hatred, forgetfulness, agitation, doubt, or suspicion. While there may be masters in the past, present, and future who attain to the same wisdom and awakening, I do not think anyone could surpass your understanding." In Nalanda, the Buddha taught the bhikkhus more concerning precepts, concentration, and understanding. He then returned to Pataligama, where he was welcomed by crowds of bhikkhus and lay disciples. He was offered food and water, after which he delivered a Dharma talk. The next morning, Venerable Sariputta received news that his mother was very ill. She was more than 100 years old. He requested permission to go to visit her. The Buddha saw Venerable Sariputta off. Sariputta bowed to him 3 times and then departed for Nala with the novice Cunda. As the Buddha and bhikkhus passed through the city gates of Pataligama, they were met by 2 officials from Magadha, Sunida and Vasikara. They had been assigned by King Ajatasattu to transform Pataligama into a major city. They told the Buddha, "We plan to rename the city gate you have just passed through, Gautama Gate. Allow us to accompany you to the ferry landing. We will name it Gautama Ferry Landing." The Ganga was so swollen from recent rains that the crows could stand on the high upper banks and dip their beaks into the water for a drink. 5 rafts carried the Buddha and his bhikkhus across the river. Venerable Ananda stood by the Buddha's side. They looked out over the water towards Vesali on the opposite shore. Ananda remembered the time 25 years earlier when the Buddha had been greeted by vast throngs of people on that shore. At that time, Vesali was almost destroyed by a plague. Young and old alike died in droves. There was nothing even the best physicians in Vesali could do. Altars were set up, but even ceaseless prayers did nothing to alter the situation. Finally, the people's thoughts turned towards the Buddha. Governor Tamara traveled to Rajgaha and beseeched the Buddha to come to Vesali in hopes that his virtuous presence would turn the tragic tide. The Buddha agreed to go. King Bimbisara and his queen, palace officials, and the citizen of Rajgaha saw the Buddha off. When the Buddha reached Vesali by boat, he found the shore crowded with altars, flags, and flowers to welcome him as though he were a savior. The people's cheers shook the air. Venerable Vimalakundana, the former Jivaka, and several senior disciples accompanied the Buddha. No sooner did the Buddha's foot touch the shore than thunder shook the sky and it began to rain. It was the first rain after a long drought, and it brought cool relief and new hope. The Buddha and his bhikkhus were led to a park in the center of Kotigama. There the Buddha spoke about the three treasures. A few days later, the Buddha and his bhikkhus were invited to Vesali. They dwelled at Kutagara Monastery in Mahavana during their stay. Thanks to the Buddha's merit and Vimalakundana's skills, the spread of the plague was slowed until at last it disappeared. The Buddha remained in Vesali for 6 months. Ananda's thoughts returned to the present day as they reached the shore. The Buddha walked to Kotigama, where he was met by a large number of monks. He spoke about the 4 establishments of mindfulness and about precepts, concentration, and understanding. After spending several days in Kotigama, the Buddha headed for Nadika. There, he and his bhikkhus slept in a brick house called Jinjkavasata. In Nadika, the Buddha thought about the many disciples who had passed away in that same region. He thought of his sister, Bhikkhuni Sundarananda, Bhikkhu Sala, and Nandika, lay disciple Sujata, who had so long ago offered him milk, and lay disciples Kakuda, Bada, and Subada. At least 50 bhikkhus in the region had attained to the fruits of stream enterer, once returner, and never returner. Bhikkhuni Nanda had attained the fruit of returning once more. Bhikkhu Sala and Nadika had attained arhatship. The Buddha taught his disciples that whoever has faith in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha need only look into his or her own heart to know whether he or she has entered the stream of liberation. There was no need to ask anyone else. In Nadika, the Buddha taught the bhikkhus concerning precepts, concentration, and understanding. He walked to Vesali, where he rested in Ambapali's mango grove. There he spoke on contemplating the body, feelings, mind, and objects of mind. When Ambapali heard that the Buddha was dwelling in the mango grove, she came at once to visit him. She invited him and the bhikkhus for a meal offering. After the meal, she asked to be ordained as a bhikkhuni, and she was accepted into the sangha of nuns. The Buddha spoke more about precepts, concentration, and understanding during his stay in Vesali. Afterwards, he visited Beluvagamaka village. As the rainy season was already underway, he decided to spend it there. It was the 45th retreat season since the Buddha attained awakening. He asked monks and nuns in the region to stay at Dharma centers in Vesali or in the homes of friends and relatives for the duration of the retreat. Halfway into the retreat season, the Buddha fell gravely ill. Though he was in extreme pain, he did not utter any sound. Lying down, he continued to mindfully follow his breath. At first, His disciples feared he would not survive his illness, but to their joy, he slowly regained his strength. After many days, he was able to sit on a chair outside his hut. Chapter 79, Sandalwood Tree Mushrooms. Venerable Ananda sat down next to the Buddha and spoke in a soft voice. I never saw you so sick in all the years we have been together. I felt paralyzed. I couldn't think clearly or carry out my duties. The others did not think you would pull through, but I said to myself, the Lord Buddha has not yet given us his last statement. Surely he cannot enter nirvana yet. That thought kept me from the brink of despair. The Buddha said, Ananda, what else can you and the sangha expect from me? I have taught the Dharma fully and deeply. Do you think I have concealed anything from the bhikkhus? Ananda, the teaching is the true refuge. Every person must make the teaching his own refuge. Live according to the teaching. Every person should be a lamp unto himself. Ananda, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are present in everyone. The capacity for enlightenment is the Buddha. The teaching is the Dharma. The community of support is the Sangha. No one can take away the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha within you. Though heaven and earth may crumble, the three gems will remain intact within every person. They are the true refuge. When a bhikkhu dwells in mindfulness and contemplates his body, feelings, mind, and objects of mind, he is like an island unto himself. He possesses the truest refuge of all. No person, not even a great master, can ever be a more stable refuge than your own island of mindfulness, the three gems within you. By the end of the retreat, the Buddha's health was greatly restored. One morning, novice Cunda, who was Venerable Sariputta's attendant, came to see Ananda. He informed Ananda that Sariputta had just died in Nala. He handed Ananda Venerable Sariputta's robe, begging bowl, and urn of ashes. He then covered his face and burst into tears. Venerable Ananda wept too. Cunda explained that after Sariputta returned to Nala, he cared for his mother until her death. After her cremation ceremony, he assembled his relatives and all the villagers and gave them a teaching concerning the Dharma. He gave them the three refuges and showed them how to follow the practice. He then sat in a lotus position and passed into nirvana. Shortly before this, he told Cunda that he wanted his robe, bowl, and ashes carried back to the Buddha. He also wanted Cunda to ask the Buddha to allow Cunda to remain by the Buddha's side. Venerable Sariputta told Cunda that he wished to pass away before the Buddha did. Venerable Ananda wiped away his tears and went with Cunda to find the Buddha. The Buddha gazed quietly at the robe, bowl, and ashes of his greatest disciple. He did not say anything. Then he looked up and gently patted Cunda's head. Venerable Ananda said, Lord Buddha, when I heard that our brother Sariputta was dead, I felt paralyzed. My eyes and mind grew hazy. I am deeply grieved. The Buddha looked at Ananda and said, Ananda, did your brother take away your precepts, concentration, understanding, and liberation when he died? Ananda quietly answered, "That is not the reason for my sadness, Lord. When Brother Sariputta was alive, he lived the teaching with his whole being. He taught, guided, and encouraged the rest of us. With Brother Sariputta and Moggallana gone, the sangha feels empty. How could we not feel sad?" The Buddha said, "Ananda, so many times I have reminded you that with birth there is death. That which comes together must separate. All dharmas are impermanent. We should not become attached to them. We must transcend the world of birth and death, arising and dissolving." Ananda. Sariputta was a great branch that fulfilled his duty in helping nourish the tree. That branch is still present in the tree. The tree is the community of bhikkhus practicing the teaching of enlightenment. If you but open your eyes and look, you will see Sariputta in yourself, in the Tathagata, in the community of bhikkhus, in all the people Sariputta taught, in novice Cunda, and along every path Sariputta travelled to spread the teaching. Open your eyes, Ananda, and you will see Sariputta everywhere. Don't think Sariputta is no longer with us. He is here and will always be. Ananda, Sariputta was a bodhisattva, an enlightened person who used his understanding and love to guide other beings to the shore of enlightenment. Among the bhikkhus, Sariputta earned praise for his great wisdom. He will be remembered by future generations as a bodhisattva of great understanding. Ananda, among the bhikkhus, there are many bodhisattvas who, like Sariputta, have taken the great vow. Bhikkhu Puna, Bhikkhuni Yasodhara, lay disciple Siddhartha, are bodhisattvas of great compassion who lived the vow to help all beings, never afraid of suffering or hardship. Bhikkhuni Yasodhara and disciple Siddhartha have passed away, but Venerable Puna continues to work courageously and energetically to serve all beings. The Tathagata thinks of Venerable Moggallana and knows he was a bodhisattva of great courage and energy. Few can compare with him. Venerable Mahakassapa, with his simple, humble life, is a bodhisattva of simple living. Venerable Anuruddha is a bodhisattva of great effort and diligence. Ananda, if future generations continue to study and practice the path of liberation, bodhisattvas will continue to appear in this world. Ananda, faith in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha is faith in the future of the community. In the future, there will be other bodhisattvas as great as Sariputta and Moggallana, Puna, Anuruddha, Yasodhara, Anathapindika. Ananda, do not grieve over Brother Sariputta's death. That noon, along the banks of the Ganga, near Ukajela hamlet, the Buddha serenely announced Venerable Sariputta's death. He urged the bhikkhus to devote all their efforts to become more like Sariputta, who took the great vow to help all other beings. He said, "Bhikkhus, you should take refuge in yourself and be an island unto yourself. Do not rely on anything else, and you will not be drowned by the waves of sorrow and despair. You should take refuge in the Dharma and take the Dharma as the island." One morning, the Buddha and Ananda entered Vesali to beg. They took their food and ate in a nearby forest. After that, the Buddha said, "Ananda, we should return to Kapala temple to rest this afternoon." Along the way to Kapala temple, the Buddha stopped several times to admire the landscape. He said, "Ananda, Vesali is so beautiful. Udayana temple is so lovely. All the temples such as Gautamaka, Satanbaka, and Bahuputta are beautiful. The temple in Kapala, where we will soon rest, is also a very pleasant place." After making a place for the Buddha to rest, Venerable Ananda went outside to practice walking meditation. While he was walking, the earth suddenly quaked beneath his feet. He felt both his mind and body shaken. He quickly returned to the temple and found the Buddha sitting there peacefully. Ananda told him of the tremor he had just felt. The Buddha said, "Ananda, the Tathagata has made his decision. In 3 months, I will pass away." Venerable Ananda felt his arms and legs go numb. His eyes blurred and his head spun. He knelt before the Buddha and begged him, "Please, Lord, do not die so soon. Please have pity on all your disciples." The Buddha did not answer. Ananda repeated his words 3 times. The Buddha then said, "Ananda, if you have faith in the Tathagata, you will know that my decisions are timely. I have said that I will pass away in 3 months. Ananda, invite all the bhikkhus in this region to gather at Kutagara Dharma Hall in Great Forest." 7 days later, 1,500 bhikkhus and bhikkhunis gathered in Kutagara Dharma Hall. The Buddha sat on the Dharma platform. He looked out over the community and said, "Bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, all that the Tathagata has transmitted to you, you must carefully and skillfully study, observe, practice, and verify for yourselves in order to transmit it to future generations. Living and practicing the way should continue to assure the peace, joy, and happiness of all beings. Bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, the essence of the Tathagata's teaching can be found in the 4 establishments of mindfulness, the 4 right efforts, the 4 bases of spiritual strength, the 5 faculties, the 5 powers, the 7 factors of awakening, and the Noble Eightfold Path. Study, practice, realize, and transmit these teachings. Bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, all dharmas are impermanent. They are born and die, they arise and dissolve. Make great efforts to attain liberation. In 3 months, the Tathagata will pass away." 1,500 monks and nuns silently listened to the Buddha and absorbed his direct teaching. They understood this would be their last chance to see and hear the Buddha give a Dharma talk. Knowing that the Buddha would pass away soon, everyone felt anguish. The next morning, the Buddha went into Vesali to beg, and then he ate in the forest. Afterwards, he and several bhikkhus departed from Vesali. Looking back at the city with the eyes of an elephant queen, the Buddha said to Venerable Ananda, "Ananda, Vesali is so beautiful. This is the last time the Tathagata will look upon it." The Buddha then turned round. Looking straight ahead, he said, "Let us head towards Bandagama." That afternoon, the Buddha offered Dharma teaching to 300 bhikkhus in Bandagama about precepts, concentration, understanding, and liberation. After several days of rest there, the Buddha proceeded to Matagama, Ambagama, and Jambugama. He instructed the bhikkhus in all these places. They next travelled to Bogangara, where the Buddha rested in Ananda Temple. Many bhikkhus in the region came to receive his teaching. He told the bhikkhus how necessary it was to verify the teaching for themselves. Whenever someone speaks about the teaching, even if he claims that it comes directly from recognized authorities, do not be hasty to accept his words as the Tathagata's authentic teaching. Compare what he says to the sutras and precepts. If it contradicts the sutras and precepts, discard what he says. But if his words are in accord with the sutras and precepts, accept and practice what he says. The Buddha went on to Pava, where he rested in the mango grove that belonged to a lay disciple named Cunda, a blacksmith's son. Cunda invited the Buddha and the nearly 300 bhikkhus traveling with him to take a meal in his home. Kunda's wife and friends served all the bhikkhus, while Cunda personally served the Buddha a special dish he had prepared. It was a dish of mushrooms, picked from a sandalwood tree, and was called Sukara Madhava. When he had finished eating, the Buddha told Cunda, "Dear Cunda, please bury whatever remains of the mushrooms and do not allow anyone else to eat them." When everyone was finished eating, the Buddha gave a Dharma talk. Then he and the bhikkhus rested in the mango grove. That night, the Buddha was seized with violent stomach cramps. He was unable to sleep all night. In the morning, he took to the road with the bhikkhus and headed towards Kusinara. All along the way, his stomach cramps worsened until he was forced to stop and rest beneath a tree. Venerable Ananda folded the Buddha's extra sangati and placed it beneath the tree for the Buddha to rest upon. The Buddha asked Ananda to fetch some water for him to ease his thirst. Ananda said, "Lord, the stream here is filled with muddy water because of a caravan of cattle carts recently passed by. Please wait until we reach Kekuta. The water there will be clear and sweet. I will fetch you water there for both washing and drinking." But the Buddha said, "Ananda, I am too thirsty. Please get me some water here." Ananda did as he was told. To his surprise, when he scooped up the muddy water into a jug, it turned perfectly clear. After he drank the water, the Buddha lay down to rest. Venerables Anuruddha and Ananda sat close by. The other bhikkhus sat in a circle around the Buddha. At that very moment, a man from Kusinara happened to walk by. When he saw the Buddha and the bhikkhus, he bowed down low. He introduced himself as Pakusa, a member of the Mala clan. He had once been a disciple of Master Alara Kalama, the same teacher the young Siddhartha had studied with. Pakusa had heard a great deal about the Buddha. He bowed again and then offered the Buddha 2 new robes. The Buddha accepted one and then asked Pakusa to offer the other robe to Venerable Ananda. Pakusa asked to be accepted as a disciple. The Buddha spoke to him of the teaching and gave him the refuges. Overjoyed, Pakusa thanked the Buddha and then took his leave. The Buddha's robe was travel-worn and stained, and so Ananda helped him change into the new robe. Then the Buddha stood up and, together with the bhikkhus, continued to walk towards Kusinara. When they reached the banks of the Kekuta river, the Buddha bathed and drank more water. Then he headed for a nearby mango grove. He asked Bhikkhu Kundaka to fold his extra robe and place it on the ground for him to lie upon. The Buddha called Venerable Ananda and said, "Ananda, the meal we ate at lay disciple Kunda's home was the Tathagata's last meal. People may accuse Cunda of serving me an unworthy meal, so I want you to tell him that the 2 meals I treasure the most in my life were the one I ate just before attaining the way, and my last meal before passing into nirvana. He should feel nothing but happiness for having served me one of those meals." After resting a short while, the Buddha stood up and said, "Ananda, let us cross Hiranavati River and enter the forest of sal trees, which belongs to the Mala people. That forest, at the entrance to Kusinara, is most beautiful."